Hello, all you reinventors. This is Lesley Jane Seymour, and I'm the founder of this podcast and of the CoveyClub, where you can go to get all kinds of free things to start your reinvention. And I'm really excited today because we have somebody who's talking about one of the biggest things that's going to be reinvented for us after the election, one way or the other, and we don't know which way things are going to go. Is Rebecca Hart Holder, who is the president of Reproductive Equity Now and co-founder of the State Abortion Access Network. And we are talking to her today because she not only had a reinvention story of her own, but because, as we know, we are in the situation right now where there are a lot of people trying to reinvent our access to reproductive health care. And it really is health care. And I've fought for that my entire life as an editor-in-chief of magazines, and mainly from an economic point of view. And my point of view is that if we can't control our bodies, we can't control our own economics. And as a child of divorce, I know what that means. It means that you cannot provide for your family. You cannot provide for your children. And that's, to me, unconscionable. So anyway, I hope that this will be meaningful to you. I hope you're going to go out and vote. I hope you've already voted. And I hope that you will keep in mind Rebecca's wonderful work that she does for women in trying to make sure that we have access to all kinds of healthcare. So let me tell you who she is and what she's doing and introduce you to her. Rebecca Hart Holder is the president of Reproductive Equity Now and co-founder of the State Abortion Access Network. Rebecca has dedicated her career to ensuring all people have access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care. As president of Reproductive Equity Now, Rebecca and her team have secured critical legislative victories to safeguard and expand reproductive freedom in Massachusetts, and recently expanded the organization's advocacy work to New Hampshire and Connecticut. Rebecca has been recognized for her work as one of Out Magazine's 2022 Top 100 LGBTQ and policymakers and advocates, and by the Boston Business Journal's Power 50 Leaders. So I hope that you will enjoy this conversation with Rebecca. She gives us great ideas of what we can do no matter which way the election goes. And no matter if you live in a blue state or a red state, you can get active. You can have an impact. As I've always said, and I always believed when I ran magazines, one woman can make a difference. Everything you do makes a difference. It makes a difference for people around you, for people who don't have a say, for people who don't have a voice. Get out there, make sure that your voice is heard, and I hope that this will be inspirational to you. So enjoy. So Rebecca, so glad that we're getting together, especially now. This is such an important time to talk about your reinvention and also, reinvention of women's reproductive rights, where we
Well,
are.
I'm so excited to be here. I have been a fan of yours for a long time, so it's such a
Oh,
pleasure. It's such a
that's
pleasure
nice to
to get to talk
hear.
to you.
Oh, that's sweet. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about you and your personal reinvention. I always like to go back to people's history because it helps people who are listening to understand where they might hook up, like,
Yeah.
oh, I was this before too. Maybe I could do that. So talk a little bit, where'd you grow up and
Well,
what did you start out doing?
so I grew up in Northwestern Connecticut, and knew from a very young age that I wanted to move to the big city. It felt like it was a little too small for me and a little too constrained, and I had big ambition. And when I was a kid, I always used to tell people that I was going to be the president. That was the
Oh,
the
really?
spiel
That's
that I
so
had.
cool. I
Yeah.
love it.
And partly it was because I have a family that is very politically active, and I saw that as a way to make the kind of change in the world that my family was working for. Um,
Were they in
and it,
politics? What did your family do? Or just they
well,
were just generally
they were
politically
no,
active?
my mom was the Democratic registrar of voters in our small town, but they also were the kind of people who went to Democratic Town Committee meetings and went to our town meetings and would take us. And so we were just, my sister and I were very involved. We just sort of understood the political process. I have to admit, sometimes we were a little bit bored by it at town meetings, but we went and we participated, and voting was a big deal, and talking about tough issues was a really important thing in my family growing up. So we were just a really sort of politically active in our community family.
That's so cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That and you hear that too. It's funny, you hear that in Kamala's life also, going to the protests in a stroller and
To expose violations against women's human rights. And in law school, I got really pulled to violations that were happening in our own country. I started to really feel like there was something to, for me at least, to add to that kind of human rights discourse by using that lens and applying it to our country. And I started looking at sexual violence against Native American women, which sort of led me down the path of reproductive rights, because Native women are one of the groups that sort of have the fewest accesses to services, or access to services. And then from there, I had a fellowship at the Center for Reproductive Rights, a litigation fellowship. And it became very quickly apparent to me that I was not a litigator. That it's not my temperament. I am
is a
much more,
litigator, for people who don't know, like I don't know anything about law, is that the person that stands up and
that's the
in
person
the
in the
courtroom?
courtroom. Yes,
Ah,
in the
okay. Yeah,
courtroom,
certain
arguing with the judge.
personality. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And I just realized that what I was really interested in was two things. One was having deep, difficult conversations with people to try to impact the outcome of policy. Like, I love to enter space that feels very black and white to some people, but is actually very gray. And I love going into that gray space. Um, and I learned so much from the executive director at Human Rights Watch at the time, Ken Roth, and I was so proud of the very small part I got to play in the mission of the organization, and excited by the strategic decisions that he made. And I realized pretty quickly during that fellowship that I had strong opinions about where resources should be invested, and that eventually I wanted to lead my own repro organization. So it sort of came from, when I got that fellowship, I thought, this is the path I'm going to be on. I'm going to be a litigator. And I realized it wasn't the place for me. So then I started that sort of reinvention that got me to this place where I do lead a reproductive rights organization.
So talk about that. What is it? Did you start it?
I did not start it. No, I run an organization called Reproductive Equity Now. And we work in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. And there's a little backstory that's important, which is to say that I went to DC for a while, and I started doing lobbying with the National Abortion Federation at the federal level. The National Abortion Federation is kind of like think of it as like the American Medical Association for independent abortion providers. Um, And I got so frustrated by the fact that we were always on defense at the federal level, that we could never play offense. And at the same time, my wife and I were thinking about starting a family, and we wanted to be closer to our family. So we moved back to Massachusetts, and we had our first child. And it I just started to realize that the investment needed to be in the states, and I started getting really focused on what it meant to change um, repro healthcare policy on a state level. And so when there was an opening at what was NARAL Pro Choice Massachusetts to lead the organization, I jumped. um, that was, I think, 7.5 years ago. And actually, my first interview was, I can't remember if it was the day after or 2 days after Hillary Clinton lost. And so, what I thought I was going to be talking about was not what I was talking about at all. We were imagining a totally different world. Um, and eventually, the organization transitioned to become Reproductive Equity now an independent organization, where we really look at the full spectrum of reproductive health care. We look at all barriers to access, and we focus on abortion access, but we advocate on everything from contraception to access to childcare and safe and healthy delivery. And We really started investing in the power of what you can do at the state level that can ultimately influence law and policy throughout the rest of the nation. So, we really see ourselves as an organization that's incubating new and bold ideas and helping to pass them through our legislatures, especially in a post-Dobbs world, to try to expand access.
So is NARAL dead everywhere? I remember marching in NARAL marches.
No, so it
No.
still exists as a national organization,
Ah, okay.
but it no longer has state affiliates. So all
Okay.
of those affiliates are independent organizations.
Okay. Are they all called
No, they all
reproductive?
have different
No.
names. All
Oh
have different
my.
names.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
our organization is called Reproductive Equity Now.
Okay. So
Yeah.
different things feeding into NARAL now than it was
Yeah,
before.
we're not a part of
Okay.
NARAL at all now. We
Oh,
don't have any
okay. So
relationship
no.
with them.
Okay. So gone.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very confusing for people who knew NARAL
I
very
know it's a
well.
lot of kind of in and out.
So let's talk a little bit about where we are as of Dobbs. I mean, none of us could see this coming. Obviously, we didn't think that this was possible, that we would find ourselves in this terrible situation. Um, the whole family, it affects men, it affects everybody.
Yeah.
What's your thinking and what's your feeling about where we're headed?
Well, I wish I could look into my crystal ball and tell you exactly who is going to win the election. Sadly, I cannot. I would sleep a lot better at night if I could. But
Oh,
what
drat. And I thought that's what we were going to do
no, if
today.
only, if
Okay. If
only.
only, right.
What I want to say is, regardless of who wins, um, well, let me back up. Let me restart that because it's not entirely accurate. There is one outcome in which there is a president sitting in the White House, a President Harris, who is going to um, not only advocate for defending and protecting women's reproductive freedom, but who is going to be unafraid to be bold and aggressive in the kinds of policies that she proposes. It's a different situation with a potential President Trump who wants to institute a national abortion ban, regardless of the fact that he's backtracking right now. That is, in fact, what he wants to do, and that's what Project 2025 wants.
Oh, yes.
But in both scenarios, um, what we need to be focusing on is state level power because a President Harris does not have 60 votes in the Senate in order to enshrine reproductive rights into law. There are some serious structural issues with our democracy right now that make it very difficult to get things like paid family medical leave, which everyone should be in favor of, through Congress. The Senate recently voted down the Right to Contraception Act and the Right to
That's
IVF
scary.
Act. It's
That's scary.
terrifying.
Yeah.
So even in a Harris administration, she will be hamstrung by the fact that there are not going to be 60 senators who will vote in favor of codification of the right to choose. That means we have to be focused on what is happening in red, blue, and purple states. In red states, we are obviously on defense. We are just trying to get people access to basic health care that frankly shouldn't be a question. That looks like trying to pass constitutional amendments, and it also looks like trying to actually implement those amendments. There's a lot of really important funding that's going on in red states in order to get people access to care. In purple states, it's a variety of offense and defense depending upon what the state legislatures look like. And in blue states like Massachusetts, where I live, it's really looking forward at policies and thinking about how can we not only protect the right here in our state, but also be expansive and get more people care in states where there has been a ban. I think what this movement focused on, the movement for reproductive freedom focused on for too many years was protecting the rights at the federal level. And unfortunately, what the other side did really well was invest in state legislatures, invest in secretaries of states, in states where
Yes.
there are judicial elections,
Across the
invest in
board,
those.
we took our eye
Exactly.
off the local. I agree.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
what we need to do is be laser focused on making sure that we are flipping, state reps, state
Right.
senators, and having representative governments. Because if you look at the polling nationwide, people, including in red states, I mean, look at Kansas, look at Ohio,
Yeah.
look at
Yeah.
states where there've been, constitutional amendments on the ballot. They win overwhelmingly. The problem is they can't vote for people who represent their values because of gerrymandering. So we have to be
Right.
really focused
Right.
on supporting what I hope is a pro repro administration, but being realistic about what that administration can do, especially when there's a Supreme Court that is so antithetical to reproductive freedom. So, my opinion is that this is a game that is going to be fought and won in the states, and that's where we have to be focused, regardless of the administration.
I guess what I don't understand, where I'm really confused about all this on the big scale is, where I think it was one of the confirmations hearings where Kamala said, "What laws are there governing a man's body?" I guess it was,
Yes,
who is
it
that? I
was
don't know, it
Brett
was
Kavanaugh's. It was
Kavanaugh.
Brett. Yeah,
And there aren't any. So how is that equal justice under the law? I don't understand how you can have 52%, I think we are, of the population have a different structure than the other half. So I
it's
guess
not.
fundamentally I'm like confused.
Well,
Like, of
I mean, I think it's about power and control and the
course it
belief
is. Right.
that women are fundamentally not equal,
Right.
and the acknowledgement that if we have access to contraception, if we have access to abortion, if we postpone becoming a parent and then need, assisted reproductive technology, that we are taking power back and that we have more economic freedom.
Oh, yes.
And
And it boils
right,
down to economics. This is where the other
absolutely.
side is forgetting. It is about economics. Once you get to decide if you can afford to have another child or whether it's the right time for you to afford to have a child, right?
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I
It's
mean, if
all
you just look at
economics.
access to contraception means you can go to school, you can go to college, you can, take a job and not be afraid to be sexually active and not be worried that you're going to get pregnant and then have to leave the workforce if
Right.
you aren't ready to do that. I mean,
Right.
I think it really boils down to, um, not just economic control, but just believing that we don't fundamentally have the right to exercise power equal with men. And
Yeah,
that's
I
why there are
agree.
no laws regulating men's bodies, because, for too long the men have been writing the laws. That's changing, obviously, but it's a long road to hoe.
Right. No, and it's, I just find that, I mean, the to forget the economics of it, and they also forget that there are men playing a part in this. You don't get pregnant by yourself. So where's the other side of this? Where's the other, why aren't the men getting punished who get women pregnant? I don't get it.
Right.
Like,
Right. And where is the
it's
where is the
like,
universal child care for
right,
families so that
right.
both people can go to work? Where is the paid family medical leave so that both parents can take time off?
No,
It
it's focused on women for a reason.
absolutely.
But I
Yeah.
think, I mean, do you think, I was noticing this the other day where I really felt like we've really changed the conversation. Maybe you don't feel this way, but just listening to it and having been, out there marching for, women's reproductive rights for my whole life, I feel like the conversation has moved away from abortion to healthcare. It's become very,
Mhm.
very clear that this is healthcare. Do you feel like we made that transition well enough? I've just, it's so obviously healthcare where we didn't
Yeah.
say that before.
Yeah. I think we're doing it effectively now. And I think part of what's happening is that we're looking more holistically at women's lives and we're saying you might need abortion at one moment in your life. You might also want to have a safe and healthy delivery at another moment in your life. And I think we're being more nuanced about what a woman's reproductive life looks like. And I think, unfortunately, what we've seen with Dobbs is, women in parking lots miscarrying, parking lots outside of a hospital miscarrying and waiting to get access to abortion care until they are close enough to death so that the hospital will allow them to get that access. And I think that is a very, very stark lesson in what the lack of access to healthcare looks like. And it really situates pregnancy within the healthcare space, which it should, and it never should have been exceptionalized. Abortion is healthcare, and healthcare is a human right. Full stop.
Yeah, I feel like we've made that transition and I feel like people understand that. And I will be very, and I'm interested in the way that it cuts across. It really, I mean, as you can tell, the numbers show it cuts across all belief systems and it cuts
Yeah,
across Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Everybody understands that and believes that, except for a small group of people who would like to control women. It's in
yeah,
my
and
opinion.
and who are exercising outsized control in our political system right
Right.
now, right? I mean, if you just look at the polling statistics of how popular access to safe abortion is, we would win if there was a national referendum, and
Right.
we
Correct.
would, and it would be an overwhelming win.
Right. So where are we and what do you think? I mean, obviously we don't know which way this is going to go, and you're right about the Senate. We're probably not going to get the Senate in any case, from what I understand. Um, but where does that leave us? Does that leave us all looking at our states? I mean, obviously, if there are voters out there listening, um,
Yeah,
we can all help by voting in our states. No matter whether they're red or blue, you still go out there. I'm in a red state. You still go out there and vote the good vote, no matter what, and you try and do what you can do, right? I mean, what other things can we do?
yeah. I think we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We have to both invest in our federal system and invest in voting reform and ending the gerrymander, in making sure that Washington D.C. and Puerto Rico, for example, become states and actually have representation at the federal level. And we have to get really invested at a local level. We have to understand, what does our mayor think about access to abortion or access to contraception? What does our state rep think? What does our state senator think? Where's our governor on this? You know, one of the exciting things about investing in local politics is that you have access to your representatives in a way that you really don't federally. Not that there are not great, federal elected officials who show up all the time, but you can go to a coffee hour with your state rep and talk to that person and make
Right.
a difference. A $50 donation sends a message to that person. You can really get invested in the place that you live, in understanding what the policies are, and really influence the people who are representing you. So I think we have to be able to really do both, and we have to make sure that every person at every potential seat they could take understands that repro is on the ballot. That, for example,
Mhm.
school boards,
Right.
running for school
Right.
committee is vitally important, because we need to make sure that kids have access to comprehensive consent-based sex ed. And we can't do that if we're not talking about that in school committee races. So we have to just constantly bring it up. It impacts every part of our lives, and all politicians should be paying attention to it.
What do you do if you're in a, I mean, I spent 45 years in New York, because I
Yep.
was there for publishing. Now I live in Louisiana, which is as backwater as you get, where, it's now a crime to even share reproductive pills with anybody. The morning after pills, all that stuff now has been criminalized. I mean,
Yeah.
like you just sit here and you're like, okay, I'm doing everything I can. I vote how I can. I try, but it's completely. And what I didn't know, what a friend of mine told me, interestingly about Louisiana, is that it's actually a state that doesn't vote. It's not that there are more registered Republicans, it's there are more
Mm-hmm.
registered Democrats. I just learned this. Um, but they don't vote for some reason. They've given up or something like that. It's something I have to investigate. I just learned about that this year. But what can individuals, there are an awful lot of us in these red states.
Yeah.
What do we do
Well,
in the red states?
let me talk about abortion specifically, because I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question. But in Massachusetts, we passed a law to shield providers who live in Massachusetts and who are licensed in Massachusetts, who are mailing medication abortion into red states where abortion has been banned. And we worked really hard to make sure that Massachusetts is stepping up, to say that if our providers are going to take a risk, we are going to protect them to the fullest extent of the law. So, in a state like Louisiana, where there are intense restrictions, bans on abortion access, one thing you can do is publicize the groups who are mailing pills into states like Louisiana for people who are facing an unintended pregnancy and decide that abortion is right for them. Most of those people are early in pregnancy and they can't travel. It's just simply too expensive to fly from Louisiana to Washington, D.C., for example, in order to get access to abortion. So, you can look on Repro Equity Now's website. We have a list of all of the providers who are mailing pills to anyone in the country. And you can make sure that people know how to access those pills. Another thing that you can do if you live in a red state is to donate to your local abortion fund. Abortion funds are organizations that help people pay for access to abortion care when they can't afford it. So that could be as simple as helping someone pay for the cost of, getting the medication shipped to them. But
Where do
sometimes
you,
people have to
where,
travel.
Rebecca, where do you find
Yeah.
that? Where,
Uh,
under what? How do you find that?
on our website, let me just
Oh,
pull
it's
it
on
up.
your
So
website?
yeah, it's
So,
on our website.
okay.
If you
Okay.
go to Repro Equity Now and you go to our abortion care guide, so it's reproequitynow.org, and then there's a tab for abortion care
Okay.
guide, you can find the list of
Okay.
places. But donate to your local abortion fund. Those funds are helping connect people to care, and helping them pay for that care. Um, I'm sure there are advocacy organizations in Louisiana who are fighting back against anti-repro laws proposed in the legislature. That's another great place to get involved. Um, and the last thing, and I think this is true whether you're in a red, blue, or purple state, you have to get invested in voting rights in your state. You have to look at the organizations that are doing advocacy on voting rights, because the fact that people aren't voting means they feel like they don't have a voice.
Right.
And we have to figure out how, as a nation, to give that voice back to people. And that's ending the gerrymander, right? That's making sure that people actually can vote on election day and have a ride and understand the issues and understand how important it is. We have to make sure that our voice counts once again.
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely something that we can all do. But I've never lived in a state like this before where every time I look up, they're passing something that and I've gone to the state capitol and sat in there when they're passing
Yeah,
various restrictive bans, and they hesitate. This was a couple of years ago. They were going to pass it, and we filled the place, and so they didn't do it. They said they had to postpone or whatever. Of course, they did it 3 weeks later when no one was
right,
around. You know,
right.
they do sneaky stuff like that. Are you worried about the lack of I am concerned about what are we going to do about contraception? That's what I'm really, what I can't really understand is why men think this is not going to impact them. Let's remember Sparta, where women decided if they weren't going to behave, the women went on a sex ban and
Yeah.
they stopped having sex. I mean, if you're not going to let us protect ourselves, what do you think is coming next?
Well, certainly this fight is not ending at abortion. It is not
Right.
just about access to abortion, it is
No.
also about access to contraception, right?
Right.
Like we were talking about earlier, access to contraception means women are economically free.
Right.
Without it,
Correct.
we can't be
Correct.
free.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
I do, we saw in Louisiana, I can't remember if it was a year ago, a little over a year ago, where there were attempts to try to ban access to contraception. That is very much part of the agenda.
Right.
Women are increasingly unafraid to share their stories about planned and unplanned pregnancy. And we should not have to prostrate ourselves in order to have basic human rights. But I think for too long, women have not talked about reproductive health care. And the more we talk about it with all the people in our lives, including the men that we love, I think the more we make an impact. When we talk about what it's like to get contraception when you are 18 years old, what it's like to go through a miscarriage when you are trying desperately to have a baby, what it is like to be at the mercy of a hospital when you are giving birth and how scary that can be, what it is like to juggle a career and childcare at the same time. We cannot make these women's issues. These have to
Right.
be
Correct.
issues that men are deeply, deeply invested in. And that means talking. That means talking about it and being really unafraid to share those stories.
Awesome. So, Becca, as we pull into the end here, if there are people out there who are thinking about reinvention and they've got some of your background or they're thinking of going into that area, um, can you give us three sort of how-tos that people need to know? What I'm always looking for, we're about 80% inspiration, but people say to me, well, how did she do it? Did she did she have to take a loan to go back to school? So what are the how-tos? And they can even be, I wish I'd known this, I would have done something else instead.
Yeah, so that's a great question. First of all, I would say a deep reliance on your friends. So, an example for me is when our organization became Reproductive Equity Now, and we were an independent organization. That happened at the same time for all of the former affiliates of NARAL. And we developed deep bonds as, leaders of organizations, as friends who needed each other in a moment of transformation when we were becoming independent. And we came together and created an organization called the State Abortion Access Network. That group of friends Um, we disagree with each other all the
Mhm.
time. We support each other constantly. We are, really just, we are there for each other through thick and thin. So you need to have people around you who are going to support you and prop you up, and who are also going to say, "Oh, that is not a good idea. I love you, but not that one." So I would say friends is a big one.
Mhm.
Um, I never ever take no for an answer. I hear no and I think of it as a challenge.
Oh, that's like
Um,
my daughter. I used to say with her when she was growing up, no is not the beginning of the discussion. Uh,
exactly.
I thought she
For
was going to be a
me,
lawyer, but she's ends up being an orthodontist. I was like, you definitely should be a lawyer. Yeah.
she ended up being an orthodontist. That's
Yes.
amazing. Is there in the good times and the dark times. So I think it's friends, it's partnership, and it's never ever take no for an answer.
Awesome. And on that, that's a great ending. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope you picked up some tips. I hope you picked up some inspiration. I hope that this is helpful to you in knowing how to take care of yourself, your daughters, your grandchildren, and the women around you. And I hope that if the podcast is helpful to you, you will give us some stars and a review. That helps us get visible to other people who may need our help, who are trying to reinvent themselves or are trying to reinvent what's going on in their state legislatures. And I hope that you will also check out CoveyClub.com for all the free stuff we offer. If you're trying to reinvent yourself in any way possible, we have guides, essays, lists, classes, you name it. And if you're trying to reinvent yourself, don't do it alone. Come join the Covey Club. We are women who are trying to help each other get through this rough time of midlife. And I can tell you from having done it myself, don't do it by yourself. Join a group of women who know how to share, who know how to hold each other up. And that's what Covey Club is all about. So until next time, this is Lesley Seymour.